think, yeah. Okay.
I think there is a record button. I've never used it, but I see it down there, and I've just assume it's if you hit it, it records. But
It does recording. So what I'll do that.
okay, great, excellent. We've got through the first technology challenge. That's good.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, yeah. So then we don't actually have, written minutes from the last meeting. Is there anything with the agenda that folks want to change? Is there anything to add from the agenda for either committee members or from staff that we need to take up?
Brian, I don't know, that we had that email from Karina Driscoll. She just asked us to enter it. I don't know how you sort of do that.
Yeah, that's a good item for the next one, which is public forum. So
Okay.
Forum, where we would enter that. I don't know. I don't remember if Ian, you got that as well, didn't you, Ian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can post it after this meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think Zariah saw it, but I could be wrong about that. I don't think it came to all. Did you see that one as well, Zariah?
From Karina, yes.
Yes. She
Oh, great.
sent it to everybody, everybody, and then Brian and I had a little follow-up and encouraged her to pursue it with this committee. So that was, and Parks and Rec Committee.
Mhm. Okay, so those comments will be part of the record for this committee then, I guess, Ian, that would be appropriate next step. Any other public comments now that we're in the public forum?
Brian, I just want, since we were kind of talking among ourselves, just for the audience to know that this was a set of comments from Karina Driscoll about urban homesteading and food self-sufficiency, and a list of ideas the city could pursue to encourage that. So if that's of interest, you should look at her comments.
Yeah, thanks for expanding on that a little bit, Sarah. Other comments in the public forum portion of the meeting, we will provide opportunity for folks to either post questions, comments during the discussion, but also recognize people if, what's the best method for that? Is there a raise hand feature, Ian? Are you?
There's 2 raised hands right now.
Oh, there are already.
And Karen Long actually emailed me and she wanted to make a comment as well. I don't know if we see her on here. I don't see her name.
Okay.
So I know she did want to make a comment. I asked her if she was going to be on the phone to let me know her number, but I don't see any phone numbers on here. So maybe she didn't make it.
Okay, we'll recognize the hands that are up. We have Jess Hyman and then Councillor Jeng. So I need to click on those hands, right? How do you modify? How do you get them into the call, into the meeting? Ian, do I have to do anything on my end?
Let me just see here. Sorry. I don't. So it's possible that I don't have host privileges, that Adam didn't give me that.
Okay. Maybe if Jess, if you're able to send us the gist of your question or comment, if it's longer than that, then we can wait till we've enabled the your microphone basically for you to participate that way. Is there anyone who wishes to share something with us that can send us a message via the chat? I saw that Councillor Jeng had raised his hand as well.
Sorry.
Okay.
We're still figuring this out. This is frustrating. I'm going to try and get a hold of Adam so that we can fix this. So if you can type it, or we'll get back to you as soon as I can get it right.
Well,
Sure.
Brian, do you want to move the public forum?
We have a comment from Councilor Jang here, specific to data around residents of Burlington. I think this is about the CDBG issue that came up at council deliberations. So it's asking for specific data about the number of Burlington residents, maybe there's demographic data of Burlington residents specifically that are served by grantees receiving the city's community development block grant funds, because these sometimes go to organizations that serve people beyond just Burlington. Yeah, I think that's generally, I think that's available. I don't know if the data for the city is collected in that manner. I asked Todd actually as a follow-up is that data already reported that way? Because it'd be good to have. I just don't know if the recipients of the funds have been keeping data in that way, and if not, I think it would be something going forward as opposed to applying it to people retroactively. Ian, in your experience, is specific data about number of Burlington residents? It's also a little hard when you have an organization like COTS. If somebody shows up homeless and they came from another town, but they're living homeless in Burlington, they're a Burlington resident, I guess. So I think definitions are kind of challenging around reporting that data.
I would think it would depend on the grant. They're different. Public service is obviously different than like hard costs and
yeah, that's a good point. If you're putting money into an organization, some of those grants are fairly small as far as the organizational budget. So you may be putting in 10 or 15,000 of CDBG dollars to an organization that has a much larger budget, and to extrapolate take the data out for Burlington residents alone may be more challenging. But when we assist people with housing rehab dollars, those are only for Burlington households. How about business assistance, Ian? Does that, the business just has to be located in Burlington, but the owner of the business could live outside of the city, right? Isn't that the way that works?
That's my understanding. I don't work directly on that program, so I actually don't know.
Yeah, that's my recollection of how that worked. It's more the location of the business as opposed to the home address of the business owner. Is there more there? Do we get any follow-up from, let's see, there's some new messages here. Fair Housing Committee will be meeting in the next month. I want to invite a member of the CDNR committee and anyone else who's interested to join. Contact Jess Hyman, the Fair Housing Project, at jhyman, Hyman, at cvoeo.org.
maybe Ian, you could just send us the specifics on that.
You follow up on the questions around CDBG eligibility?
No, this is an invite from CVOEO to their fair housing meeting, and just
ping us with an email.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Then there's a question about, this is hard to do by text, by messaging, but we'll do the best we can. Also, specific community-led programs receiving CDBG funding. If you look at the report, you can see all the recipients, and I recall from my days at CEDO that the federal government frowned upon the use of CDBG dollars for sort of neighborhood level projects. I thought that was a great way to use it, but they basically came and gave us a, what's that called, Sarah, when they give you a finding,
yeah,
which isn't a good thing. A finding's a bad thing. And they basically said, we don't want you using the CDBG dollars to support neighborhood green up or cleanup events. That's not really what we expect this money to be used for needs to have a direct link to low and moderate income people, and that link was not strong enough for them. So they basically told the city to stop funding those types of projects with CDBG. They said those are great efforts, but find another way to fund them, basically, is what we were told. And I don't know if there's other, in terms of community-led initiatives receiving CDBG, I'm not sure, maybe somebody else on the committee or staff or Councilor Jang has a specific example. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I mean, I can try and just answer this. And just to my knowledge, normally only 15% of the CDBG allocation to Burlington can be used for public service, which would be supporting other nonprofits that are providing services. And then a portion of it is used for capital projects. So I know like Turning Point Center was a capital project, the food bank, things like that. So they may serve a wider area than just Burlington, but predominantly is focused in Burlington.
Yeah, and I think it's also an important distinction to notice that in many of those projects, those are, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars, where the CDBG just comprises a portion, a very small portion. So getting into a very detailed accounting of beneficiaries where they live presents challenges, especially because it's proportionate to how much funding the overall project is using. So I think we just need to we don't have the people on this meeting to get into the details of this question. It's a good question that I think I've asked Todd for a little more information on. So hopefully you'll be able to
But it might be good for us to have a review of, I mean, CDBG money is really difficult to use. I'm a little out of the loop, but I sat on the statewide CD board for many years, and I know how hard it is to use those dollars and meet all the HUD criteria. So a little refresher on that would be helpful.
Sure, and to be clear, Councilor Jang was asking about how do low-income Burlington folks get access to the money. It's not that I guess it's challenging to explain this, but basically CDBG is used to support activities that support low-income people, either job creation or job training or affordable housing or housing rehab. And then there's a number of public services and economic development. So it's not as though the money is accessible to residents directly unless you're getting assistance under one of those programs. So I think we just need a little more conversation when we have the ability to have staff that are more familiar with CDBG on the meeting, you know, in our meeting, and we'll request that at our next meeting if that would be. I think that's something that would be a helpful thing for the questions that Councilor Jang is raising here. Okay. Is there anything waiting for additional conversations or chats? No hands are raised. I see Councilor Jang's hand still raised. I just want to make sure that that satisfied you in terms of we've reached our limit as far as what we can sort of answer accurately about this topic, and I don't want to take away from the rest of the conversation for the committee, which is focused on the tenant protection issues. So I just want to ask the committee if that's okay to move on to that. Sound good? Okay. So I'm going to ask for a little help from staff here. I don't have the document in front of me that you sent around, and I tend to participate in these Zoom meetings with the sort of video chat focus as opposed to having a document in front of me. So if you could sort of help us with the the items that are in that document that you sent as a follow-up to the meeting that was supposed to happen in February.
Sure. So there were a few documents that were distributed as part of this conversation starting in, it was maybe February or January. So there was one that was a city presentation that was based on the research paper that CEDO did. And then there was a document that the Burlington Tenants Union submitted in February. That was the last piece of information. I think that was the focus of what we were going to discuss in the February meeting that was canceled. So
I put it in the chat.
Yeah, I got that.
Yep.
I see that. And if this might be a good time for Christy and anybody else who's on with the Burlington Tenants Union to sort of walk through the document that you shared with us back in February.
Excellent. I can read that for you.
Okay.
You gotta forgive my voice. It's not the way it usually sounds. We've had a barrage of secondhand smoke killing us this week.
Oof.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. Thank you for inviting members of the Burlington Tenants Union to advise this committee on improving tenants' rights and protections. 60% of Burlington residents are tenants. Burlington has one of the highest rates of housing insecurity in the U.S., with over 44,000 households paying far above 30% of their income just for rent. For far too long, tenants and our concerns have been ignored by Burlington government. While rents have increased and quality of rental housing has declined, it is time to give the voices of marginalized residents a central place in these discussions. Over the past year, tenants have been meeting, sharing common problems, and working to be heard. The demands below come from our discussions and meetings, including many MPA meetings and the first Burlington Tenant Summit. Tenants agree that our problems and concerns have not been addressed by city officials. We look forward to working with you on these issues. This is by no means a complete list of issues and concerns of the Burlington Tenants Union, simply those matters that are significant and appropriate for the CDNR to work on at this time. BTU see 5 areas that will provide immediate and significant relief to the housing crisis. Increasing the power and scope of the Housing Board of Review. 2, a code enforcement department that works for tenants. 3, enacting rent control. 4, enacting just cause evictions. And 5, safe parking, safe camping. The BTO also has 4 demands that are specific and limited in scope, but address serious flaws in tenant protections. A, ban the box. B, increase the penalty on all improperly withheld security deposits. C, expand the retaliatory eviction clock. And D, publicize the database of landlords, certificate of compliance, rental registration, and code violations. 1, Housing Board of Review. The Housing Board of Review has the broad power under its charter to become the main tenant resource body within the Burlington government. Its present focus on security deposit complaints for tenant and code exemptions for owners needs to be expanded. It's time for the HBR to live up to its potential as written in the city charter. Our demand, HBR needs to be restructured and its responsibilities expanded in these ways. 1, HBR members must reflect the makeup of Burlington itself, as we are the ones that, put the money into Burlington. A makeup of this board should be 3 tenants, 1 homeowner, and 1 landlord. The 3 tenants should represent different Burlington incomes: 1 low-income tenant, 1 nonprofit housing tenant, and 1 medium or above income tenant. HBR must become the city's agency responsible for tenant and landlord education. This includes a website with all available tenant landlord resources. The San Francisco Rent Board website shows that what the HBR could be. And there's www.sfrb.org that you can go to and have a look at what they have for their HBR. HBR must work with Community Action, Vermont Tenants, and Vermont Legal Aid to increase and consolidate information on tenant resources and rights. The HBR must be committed to providing legal resources to tenants to balance resources of landlords. HBR must be actively publicized as the place where tenants can appeal when the Department of Permitting and Inspections has not resolved building code issues. And 5, HBR must enforce rulings and increase penalties made by both HBR and code enforcement over landlords who refuse to repair their properties. The second, code enforcement. A major impetus for the founding of Burlington Tenants Union was repeated tenant stories of uninhabitable apartments and lax enforcement of building codes. Code enforcement routinely works for the landlord's benefit, not for the tenant's rights. Common examples of this are: 1, not providing tenant with information on the process of code enforcement and on their rights during the process, nor submitting reported violations in a timely manner. 2, not citing or fining landlords for not repairing code violations. 3, not providing tenants with copies of all investigative reports, orders for repairs, and inspector's notes. 4, no or minimal penalties for unrepaired code violations. At present, a landlord can expect at most $75 fine for the most egregious of violations, which is obviously unacceptable. Our demand: focus and practice of code enforcement must be changed so that it is on the side of the tenants, not the landlords. It must enforce the code of ordinances as they are written and reverse its practices with respect to the 4 issues above. 3, rent control. As we stated in the first, 60% of residents are tenants that pay far too much of their incomes to their landlords. In Burlington, over 3,000 households are severely rent burdened, paying more than 50% of their income, while another 2,000 households are rent burdened, paying 30 to 50% of their income, and 80% of these households are incredibly low income, making less than half of the area median income. The only way to keep tenants from paying most of their income to landlords is by limiting the amount that landlords can charge. On top of this, only 25% of these households have access to Section 8 vouchers, even though their income qualifies them to receive one, which even for these households, it has become increasingly harder for them to find apartments that qualify under Section 8 rental cost requirements. These households are unable to cover healthcare costs, buy healthy foods, have time to participate in our community, and spend quality time with their children. Rent control is a part of healthy communities and an extension of a strong democracy. We call on the City Council to accept the moral imperative that housing is a human right, which is not in the US, and that rent control is one tool to make that right a reality. Throughout the US, rent control has been adopted in response to the housing crisis. Rent control has a proven track record for protecting the most vulnerable residents from rising rent prices related to gentrification and property speculation. Despite repeated claims that market rate rent is the only solution, the past decades show that this approach only leads to increasing housing insecurity and costs. In San Francisco, while median rent increased by $800 in the past decade, rent control units increased at most $200, keeping low-income families and seniors in their communities. An important city and community value is to protect low-income families and seniors from the negative health impacts of high rent and/or displacement. So the city council should have no problem supporting rent control. Rent control is a way to ensure the landlords cannot gouge vulnerable residents and take advantage of hot housing markets at the expense of long-term residents. Our demand: enact rent control immediately as both a humane and necessary first step in bringing about housing as a human right. 4, just cause evictions. An integral part of rent control is to provide just cause evictions. They provide tenants and their home owning neighbors stability and community while improving community and neighborhood relations. Just cause evictions ensure that tenants are given the right to stay in their homes as long as they are paying rent and following their rental contract. Landlord rights are well protected under just cause evictions. Burlington must enact just cause evictions ordinances so that tenants are an integral part of neighborhoods and treated as citizens with a right to continuity in their homes and communities. Just cause evictions have been enacted on a local level throughout the country. A Princeton study of just cause evictions in 4 municipalities showed that the rate of eviction filings and evictions decreased significantly. Our demand: enact just cause evictions to increase housing and community stability and to reduce the municipality manipulation of the rental market by churning. 5, safe parking, safe camping. We recognize that the housing continuum includes camping, living out of a car, and sleeping in other locations not meant for human habitation. We believe that everyone without hard walls housing deserves to live within the city limits safely. The city must provide sanitation and trash removal for these residents and allow for people to sleep in public spaces free of harassment from city officials. Our demand: make the entire city a safe place for unsheltered people to live. The city must provide information about where people can camp and park safely. Provide publicly reviewed training of city staff and maintaining safe interactions with those sleeping outdoors. Provide trash removal to campers and 24-hour sanitation access. 4 demands that are specific and limited in scope, but address serious flaws in tenant protections. A, ban the box. Too many vulnerable residents are discriminated against before they even fill out a rental application. As other states and cities begin to recognize how rental applications are used to discriminate against our most vulnerable residents, we call on the city council to ban the box and make it illegal for landlords to have the following on their rental applications. 1, asking for criminal history of the prospective tenant. 2, asking for arrest records of prospective tenants. 3, asking for a background check. 4, asking for credit score. 5, asking for more than 2 years worth of eviction history, which is damaging. That's where most tenants get stuck, because as soon as the word eviction is seen on any application, that's a downfall. Tenants don't usually get whatever apartment they're applying for. At a time when many formerly incarcerated residents are stuck living in prisons because of a lack of available rental housing, and when many landlords use the above history checks to discriminate against those looking for a second chance, now is the time to remove the barriers. Our demand: ban the box on rental applications regarding criminal history, arrest history, background checks, credit checks, and prior eviction history. B, increase the penalty on all improperly withheld security deposits. Present system encourages landlords to take people's deposit money without a penalty in most cases. Landlords are responsible for knowing their legal obligations and should not be excused for ignorance nor encouraged to try their luck at avoiding the existing 2-time penalties. Improperly held deposits must be returned at 3 times the original amount in all cases. Our demand: landlords are responsible for knowing applicable laws and fulfilling their obligations under Burlington and Vermont laws. Violations need to have significant default penalties, i.e. 3 times, to discourage theft of deposits. C, tie retaliatory eviction clock to complaint resolution. Currently, retaliatory evictions are illegal within 90 days after filing a complaint with code enforcement. Resolution of complaints can take months. The ban on retaliatory evictions should start on the date of complaint and end no sooner than 90 days after the resolution of a complaint. Our demands: tenants need security when they have housing problems. Any eviction initiated from the date of complaint until 90 days after the resolution of a complaint will be considered retaliatory and will be actively prosecuted. D, accessible database of landlord certificate of compliance, rental registration, and code violations. The mayor promised a list of landlords' rental and code enforcement violation histories would be publicized. This has not happened. The tenants of Burlington are calling for transparency that they were promised. Our demand: publish the city's promised database and promote it on the city's homepage. Have the upcoming CEO open data platform include the information in an easily accessible form. And that concludes our paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. That was there's a lot of information there. I had a chance, of course, to read it when you submitted it a few months ago, and I think I'd be interested in hearing from other members of the public and from other members of the committee, just initial thoughts and reactions to that. Councilor Hightower.
Yes, I guess as a first question, sorry, I did manage to read this before you started, and then was trying to do a little bit. Do you know what the current makeup is of the HBR? I know I managed to look at that. I know 2 of the people on it who are tenants, and I assume one of them at least is a low-income tenant, but I can't be sure.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that right at this point in time, as we have been focusing on other things, seeing that this was delayed as long as it was.
Right.
But the two tenants, as far as we know of, I'm not sure about the ratio for landlords.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Carpenter, you?
Well, I'm just, there's a lot there, and I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around how do we, I guess, break it down into bunches of stuff to have some more meaningful discussion on, you know, some are more short-term, some are more long-term. Some of them we can do under city charter. Some of them need state enabling legislation. So I'm sort of thinking out loud, how can we put some of those topics in buckets that sort of would be short, medium, and long, and then kind of with that, what it would take. We need to have a meaningful discussion about each of them, and then, you know, how do you deal with them? You know, what's our ability, and, you know, so I don't have it. I'm not saying it very articulately, but, and I don't know if this is too much to ask staff to kind of resort it into short-term, medium-term, long-term, what's within the city charter, what isn't. I mean, it's sort of our, like, a research. And to be honest, I haven't read the other, I did read the other longer paper that you submitted to us. Maybe it addresses some of that, I'm not sure.
No, this was the only paper that we had actually submitted, was this one back
Okay.
in February.
Okay.
But we were wondering some of this stuff ourselves, as far as what was the city charter would be able to do and what would have to be done at the state level. We weren't exactly sure when we wrote this exactly which ones would be which. But as far as the Housing Board of Review, I believe that would be a city charter. The code enforcement section is definitely a city charter. And a couple of the other things might be at the state level. I'm not quite sure, but that would have to be decided by you guys. We don't have that. We're not politically involved in that section of it.
Sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to make, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Zara. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to make Ian decide what if this is short, medium, and long term.
Well, yeah.
But I feel like that's a little bit up to council, but I do wonder things like one of the reasons I was like, maybe we can just talk about HBR today is because I agree that's one of the things that feels more within our purview, and where we could do some things quickly and without a charter change, but I don't know.
Yeah, I saw Ian trying to talk, and maybe Patty wanted to say something it looked like, but go ahead, Ian.
So for one thing, I had to invite people using my link. So if you need to speak or you want to speak, if you can write your email in the chat, I can forward you my link. That the names will show, you know, you can see that Ollie joined and it says my name. So I apologize.
A lot of Ians.
This is the best way we can do this right now. So
Okay.
if you just write,
do you have thoughts on the topic of how to sort these items? I think whether we have authority or not, I think you actually you've already sort of told us on some of these. So I think that you know most of them, whether we have authority under charter to do what and what we don't have authority to do. Is that right?
Yeah, we did consult with the city attorney about both the Housing Board of Review and changing just cause, tenant eviction laws to create like a just cause eviction. And even on, they're both really would probably require approval from the state. The reason that the Housing Board of Review, they think it might, is because it's actually a Housing Board of Review is a specific legislation that the state allows cities to have a Housing Board of Review, and they stipulate how the Housing Board of Review can be used. So the Housing Board of Review, it's vague in our municipal code. It doesn't really stipulate what it can't be used for and what it can be, but it's the state legislation that does that. And therefore, we would at least have to ask the state or to consult their attorneys to see if that was a possibility.
I think it would help us in our process to know that for sure, that any changes to the purview of the Housing Board of Review would require, when you say legislative approval, I think you're saying, and that's usually done through charter. That's how it's done. And then we have to bring it to the voters, get the voters to weigh in, and then bring it to the legislature.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's my understanding of how it would
That's
work.
a charter change.
Charter change.
So,
And our charter is really a state law. So that's what our charter is. It's essentially state law. So either.
But I don't think that's what Ian, I think he was talking about the HBR's charter, not our charter.
Well, you could do it either way. I mean, you could, if the legislation, I mean, the state could change what an HBR can do for the whole state, or we could change it and get approval for our changes, I suppose.
Okay, but it wasn't that okay, just to clarify, it's not that we know that we can't do these things, it's that we're not sure. So step one would just be clarifying with the state. And then step two would be any actions after that, right?
Yep.
On that one, on HBO and Housing Board of Review, I actually served on it for 4 years in the late 80s, early 90s. That one is clear that, but the other ones we definitely don't have authority on the rent control topic and on the just cause evictions. That I'm sure of. Doesn't mean we can't go to the legislature, but that requires putting it to the voters and then taking that to the legislature for their approval.
Then Brian, if I can ask a follow-up question on HBR, I feel like this is a good one to talk about since it's more likely that we can talk about it. On some of the things, having been on the DRB, some of the things like the makeup and things like that, I think are easier to do, but some of the things in terms of how much HBR does, how would that work out in terms of the volunteer members? And having been on it, like, what does that mean for them and their workload, and how much of that could city staff do versus?
I thought of that exactly. The list of requested or demanded purview or topics that the Housing Board of Review would take on would require, I think, a significant increase in training and expertise and sort of capacity of that board. It used to be that it met at least every month and sometimes twice a month, almost entirely to hear the disputes over security deposits, and then the code enforcement issues would come up occasionally. I have no idea if that's still how it's meeting. And Patty, you might go to some of those meetings, so maybe you know if you could tell us. I think we have to go through a process to get Ian. You can talk now. Great.
I think I can talk. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I did have them. I got them from the previous chair of the HRB back about 3 or 4 months ago, maybe 6 months ago now. But and that is that the majority of the cases are still security deposit cases, and the code enforcement cases are about, I mean, we've only had a few, maybe 3 this year.
Yeah. Okay.
So
we have
as far
some
as
comments
what
here.
we've dealt with, the reason why you don't see as many code enforcement cases with the HBR is because tenants do not have the information that the HBR can handle those cases.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably why you don't see as many of them.
Can the HBR handle those? Or we
Yes.
might.
Yeah, I had a case with the HBR with code enforcement last summer. So if tenants are told about it and they're told how it works, they can go to the HBR with those cases.
And this is for my own information. Is it what I want, judicial findings, or is it more negotiated and mediated findings?
No, they arbitrate these disputes.
Judicial.
Yeah, it is judicial, definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it has the same enforcement capability as a court order, basically. That someone can take it further to Superior Court and appeal it, but that's really what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
There are written comments coming in, and I'm not sure if folks have had a chance to speak. Devin, it looks like Devin Ayers wrote in, just because it requires a charge change doesn't mean this committee shouldn't prioritize. It may take longer to enact, but the charge change requirement does preclude City Council from developing meaning. Maybe she meant does not preclude from meaningful protections for tenants. Please don't get bogged down in the technical details. Focus on the policy issues. Does not preclude. Okay, yeah, for sure. I think what we're trying to identify right now is there some low-hanging fruit that can be dealt with quickly, and then what are more long-term issues. Longer-term issues are going to be more involved and take on more time. Doesn't mean we're not going to get to them, but it's I think part of what we're trying to get a handle on is, because each one of these is going to have to be debated and discussed, and research is going to be done, and so it won't all happen at once, and we're just trying to queue that up for the committee to be able to get through it and have staff support for that process.
Well,
Correct. Yeah, we didn't expect it to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We didn't expect it to be an immediate thing. We knew from the start of writing this paper that there were things that we didn't know which level was which. So we don't expect an immediate result, but it's just stuff that we need to have addressed.
Yeah, thank you. And Sarah?
Well, I just want to comment that because of the previous work I've done at the state level, that you do have to kind of prioritize in the sense that if for example, you wanted a change and we decide we needed a charter change for HBR, we should plot out the timing about, when would that go to the voters? When would it go to the legislature? I mean, so that we can look at other things that might be more in our control. So it's almost like a timeline for how to approach the issues. And obviously, predating that, you'd need some public meetings and input and all that kind of stuff. So it's just sort of wrapping your head around what's the sort of feasible track to take something.
Sure.
Yeah.
It would be, yeah, Zorai, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's like somewhat clear that I think at least one of these will definitely be a charter change that we ask for in the upcoming election, which means that if we can just figuring out what we need a charter change for so that we can maybe even bundle some things or see like where there's comparable language that will allow us to do multiple things. I don't think HBR is one of those. I assume that would be its own kind of very separate charter, whereas other things like evictions and ban the box might be together, things like that.
Yeah. Well, my suggestion for the committee to do is to give some spend some time on what of the list of items that we both heard tonight and that we are aware of from our just from the fact that we are elected representatives and we hear from our constituents, and issues have been raised in housing forums, and the tenants union has certainly been vocal on a number of issues, and it seems to me that there is a unique opportunity around the eviction subtopic because of the basically the COVID-19 has created, I think, more awareness and willingness to discuss at both at the local and the state level how we handle the process of terminating a tenancy. So that I just want to put out there that may be one that I'm not saying we can get consensus on quickly, but it may be one that in light of the fact that we have a fairly big election coming up in November as far as voter turnout and voter participation, you always get a better read on what the citizens want when you have a bigger turnout. So it's in many ways an opportunity to bring those issues forward. I know that Councillor Freeman is hoping to advance this through the charter change process. So maybe there's a parallel or a joint deliberation that this committee does with charter change around that.
That's great, because tenant protections right now, under the COVID-19, we hadn't gotten this all written up yet. But right now, our slogan is food, not rent, because there are so many people that are still out of work and they're not able to pay their rent, and landlords are still expecting full payment every month. You know, so there's definitely a huge gap, and renters are not feeling protected right now under COVID-19 because they're still having to pay money they don't have. So yeah, hopefully that's something that the eviction thing that we wrote up can have a part in taking care of. As for just cause, well, it's just cause. It's a little bit different than COVID-19. So they're just looking to be protected under COVID-19.
Okay. I don't know. There's a question I don't think I'm prepared to answer. What's the makeup of the Housing Board of Review? I think that was asked by Zariah right away after the presentation, and we couldn't really confirm it in terms of tenants, landlords, and maybe just homeowners who are neither a tenant or a landlord. I don't think we have that data, and that could take, it could take a couple of emails perhaps by staff to the. I mean, it's staffed by the city attorney's office still, I believe. I think it's still handled by the city attorney's office. Yeah.
And
So if Ian, if you could follow up with, I'm blanking on who that would be. It would be Linda Blanchard to start with, maybe, or Lisa Jones. I can't remember. Lisa Jones. Yeah.
Lisa Jones, sorry.
Okay.
Brian,
Yep.
maybe we want to, either for our next meeting or plot it out over the course of the summer, take topic. I'll just take the Housing Board of Review and like spend 30 or 40 minutes on it, not, really, and invite her, for example, if she's the one heading it up, and so we can sort of ask all the questions at one time and hear where people see the flaws and, what we might do, sort of a more, I think we need to have some depth on each of these topics, and BTU has a great job, but we've got 85 hours worth of work here, so I think we should pick a few and spend a longer period of time kind of vetting what we can do or not do, and what ought to be changed.
Perhaps inviting both staff and maybe the chair of the Housing Board of Review to appear before us as well would be helpful for that conversation. And Zariah, did you have something you wanted to say?
I did, which was, I think I am starting to learn the answer to this question, but I think also it would be good just to name it out for transparency. But what's kind of the best way to figure out who on staff, both like technical specialists and legal specialists, is best for like city council to come to with this kind of question and to work with collaboratively on an issue that may interest them without it being like imposing, and then doing our own research or legal advice if nobody on staff is interested. Like, what's the best process around that?
I'm going to let Patty answer it a little bit, just because it will land somewhat on code enforcement, on city attorney's office, and possibly somewhat on Ian. So let's take a stab at that. That's a good question.
And I'm really sorry. I'm going to ask you to kind of repeat that. I was going to try and type something.
Okay.
So I wasn't able to listen and type at the same time. I've stopped typing.
No worries. My question is like, what's kind of the like ideal and transparent way to reach out to staff and be like, hey, I'm interested in working on this. Who at CEDO or code enforcement or whatever else is, and like, how do you get staff resources, both in terms of like the technical specialists, like I assume you and Ian are, but also like the legal specialists to work on any specific issue, and how much of that does council usually do within their own budget for research and so on?
I mean, I'm going to speak officially because that's the hat I happen to be wearing here, but my experience has been that it's not. You can reach out to Bill or myself if you have questions, and there's no limitation to what we can of course there's limitations, but we're both all willing to answer questions and do whatever research is necessary. I'm happy to, any questions that need to be answered from a technical side as far as code enforcement is concerned, happy to get, if I don't have the answer, I can get the answers. And I know, I hate to say I'm speaking for Bill, but I'm going to speak for Bill. I know he's the same. As far as the legal piece of things, I would say start it with Lisa Jones and see what they, what she says. I don't want to speak for her. It's usually pretty seamless, intercity-wide, wise, I should say, not wide, when you're talking about departments within the city.
Yeah.
Brian, Ian?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, Councilor Jang.
Okay, thank you. I think what Zoraya has shared, in bringing people with expertise, to give you some advice, I think it's a great approach. But I was wondering if it's possible for the committee itself to bring a resolution to City Council and task the administration on doing research about what is available legally, and also what is available in terms of what we can do. I think both ways, I believe that if you go through a resolution, it might go faster because you have a time certain to get the answers back that you need in making decisions. But in the other hand, I think I also wanted to ask the tenant union, the woman who just, I think it's Sabrina, yeah, who just presented, and was just wondering, in your point, you stated there is 60% Burlingtonian who are renters. And it seems you have now an organization, and was just wondering about the input of people who are renters about this proposal you bringing to council. Was just wondering if she can add to it a little bit.
Yes,
Christy,
yeah, we had,
yeah.
okay. We have,
Yep.
we have a lot of renters in Burlington that have been coming to us with concerns from each areas of this document. More and more about the evictions and the code enforcement section of it. I myself right now am dealing with a landlord that has been doing nothing but harassing the daylights out of us, trying to get us out of his unit. By not making repairs, sending people over to do illegal work at the wrong time of the day, flat out refusing to take care of housing code violations and stuff like that. We hear more and more about that, and retaliatory evictions as well, for reporting code violations that the landlords refuse to make to code enforcement. So we've got a lot of tenants surrounding those two, constant questions about what's legal, what's not, what should be taken care of, what shouldn't, and what landlord responsibilities are a good portion of the questions that we get on our site. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, yes. Thank you. Yes.
Councilor Carter.
Again, back to, I'm just feeling like, and I appreciate Zoraya's perspective, but I don't want us all going off in different directions, like my asking staff and you're asking staff. I feel like we need little work groups on some of this stuff, and maybe that would help us sort of narrow our questions, and I think invite other participants. I hear a comment, just a written one, legal aid might be a good one to invite, CVOEOs, tenant program. There are people that have done a lot of work around some of these things outside of us and outside of the city of Burlington. So just maybe that was back to my comment about taking a few topics and trying to really have a little more in-depth discussion so we can frame what it is that we want to ask about.
Okay, I like that. Councilor Hightower.
Yeah, I don't know how you, yeah, so I think agreeing with Sarah is, and to take a little bit further, I don't know how we feel about maybe I know we've been meeting every other week. I don't know how usual or normal that is, but like basically setting aside one of the times a month to actually go through, and I don't know if this is unorthodox, so if it is, you can just be like, that doesn't make any sense, to like go through one of these, invite, like be like, staff, if you're interested in working on this with council, like, can you show up to this meeting on HBR on the specific thing? That way we have all the staff members that are interested, hopefully, you know, all of the relevant NGOs as well, and unions. And then every other one, we do like the actual stuff that's coming like from, not the actual stuff, but the like time deadline stuff that's coming from council in terms of resolutions and stuff.
I think that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I see that working well with how Councilor Carpenter laid it. I think both of those they complement each other. And I think that knowing that we have only a certain amount of time to devote as councilors who have we have other things to do as well, both as councilors and as people, that we take on basically, you know, maybe just 2 of these issues, that we don't try and add a long list and keep going through all of them, but that we just stick with the Housing Board of Review and just cause eviction would be my proposal.
Yeah,
and we just take those on and we just dig into those 2. What do you think about that?
Can I add one? Can I add ban the box?
Yeah, that list of items was extensive. It raises a whole host of issues, but I think we can certainly attempt to get at that as well.
I'm agreeing with you, Brian, but I'm also maybe wondering if a next useful session would be a primer on, for instance, ban the box is landlord tenant law. You know, I don't know what we can do or what we can't do. I mean, sort of walk through these. This gets back to sort of, and I don't mean short term and long term in terms of priority, but, you know, just understanding what bucket do those fall in. And like if ban the box is within our control, we should just know that. But if it's in the same bucket with just cause eviction, then you might want to package them all together. Or not all together, but, you know, and so I think that's a function of, are we asking for a change in statewide landlord tenant law, and how much authority does a municipality have around landlord tenant law or not? And the one thing I just also sort of, and this is why I was encouraging, and I agree with you, Zoraya, some work sessions to dig into, is there are partners who would like to work with us. I caution these are not all Burlington-centric problems. And particularly anything we're going to propose that impacts people outside Burlington, we need partners. So I don't want us to be spinning our wheels, for instance, talking about it all among ourselves and then having legal aid or CBOEO not agree with us. I mean, we need to sort of bring them in earlier than later.
I had one comment that I just realized, because it's hard to keep track of both the content and the conversation and then the written stuff. And I went back and looked. Not that I wasn't listening, but I was you know, multitasking. But is the notion that either the ability of code enforcement to actually enforce ordinances, and whether there is some changes that are needed with respect to you know, whether the enforcement mechanism is good enough, whether the penalty is enough, you know, whether the approach is you know, the right approach given the issue. That issue has been raised at our meetings for quite a while, and it's definitely been echoed here by some of the comments. So I just want to point that out. That was asked as, you know, could we also keep, you know, focused on the question of code enforcement? I missed hands. I think Zariah had hers up and then you, Sarah.
Oh, Ian first, is that what you said? I think he had his hand up too.
No, Zariah first and then Sarah, I think. Ian, are you waiting too?
Yeah. I can go. So
Go ahead.
because we have 2 new members and this was like months ago, just in terms of what this process, what we anticipated this process to be, CEDO did initial research on and made some recommendations. A lot of them are similar and as what the tenants union has proposed. And we sort of did an overview background research to just begin to have some common understanding of these issues and how we could approach them. So there has been that work done, and the first 3 recommendations were improve accessibility of code enforcement data, including COC ratings for the new rating system, and make sure that that's publicly available. That was completed through the city's new open data platform. So previously that information was available through the property database. It was sort of confusing. So there is a new system for that. The second was strengthen the city's minimum housing standards. I know that Bill and Patty, and I think Karen Paul, Councillor Paul, was working on reviewing the minimum standards, and Bill Ward, the director of the Department of Permitting and Inspections, he presented some initial findings of that work and some initial recommendations of how to strengthen the minimum housing code. And we can go back and look at that, or we can follow up on where that is. So that was another piece of work that was ongoing. And the third recommendation was sort of around educational materials and whether educational materials could be required to be distributed by landlords when signing a lease. So I just didn't want to lose track of that. And I think the approach was for the committee to sort of recommend how they want to proceed, and then for the administration to have a conversation in terms of like what resources can we devote to this if we need to have staff resources. Like questions around what's in the charter or not, I can ask legal for their opinion on that, or we can have legal come to the committee. If we're looking at a more involved process about further research or recommendations on next steps, that would take staff resources, we can do that. It just requires a conversation and a specific ask, I think.
Zariah and then Sarah.
Ian.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I mean, we just got the CEDO study today, so I just briefly skimmed it, but I don't see that as being, I guess everything that you said, I don't see it as negating what we just said or like changing that plan. I think some of the things, like especially, which is one of the reasons that even looking at all the comments that I left enforcement off of the list of things we should do right now, just because it's a much bigger beast, which would require more staff time. Like it's just a much more complicated issue in terms of what are the resources, like how do we change, which I feel like that would require more of what you're talking about, Ian, with like, let's go back to the administration and see what they can tackle. Whereas some of the things that we're talking about, I feel like a lot of these are like, yes, no, do we have the authority to do this? If yes, then what is the best resolution? If no, then what is the best? I just feel like there are not easy topics, but like easier to get to an outcome without digging too much into the weeds. And so given that all of those I think would also have a huge impact, I feel like they're worth tackling, as well as the things that you said.
Sarah, Councilor.
Well, and I agree with, I was just gonna, sort of when you queue up, when do you do these? I mean, I like Soraya's idea of sort of a deep dive in a couple, 2-3 things. I do think code enforcement should be one of them, and I can do this offline. I need to be re-educated, but for example, with code enforcement, is it an ordinance change? Is it a capacity issue? You know, so it's just, and if it's a capacity issue, that's a money issue. So maybe, but it's just sort of trying to frame the discussion. And this was what I was talking about, sort of short-term and long-term. I know everybody wants to do everything today, but you know, how do we tackle things in some kind of order? And if revamping code enforcement is a priority, but I think would still take a deep work session, and maybe that's later on this summer. We tackle the other things first.
Patty.
I think it's important, and I haven't really thought about how I'm going to frame this, so bear with me for a minute, but I think it's important when people say code enforcement, what it is they're talking about, what specifically the content is. We enforce, as a rule, like my division is minimum housing code enforcement, chapter 18. And I think it's really important for people to read through that. We don't expect, obviously we expect partnership with a lot of the rest of the departments in the city, but we don't have control, for instance, over, and there was a comment, I don't know, about people urinating in the yard. Unless we see it and can report it to the proper authority, i.e. the police department, it's not anything that we don't have the authority to enforce against that. We can make a report just like any other citizen. When it comes, and I can't speak to the specifics of an ongoing case either. So my thoughts would be that we look at code enforcement either broadly as all codes, in which case you're looking at all of, you know, our city ordinances, or are you looking at minimum housing codes? Two very different things. And I think that's really, really important for everybody to wrap their heads around.
I'll take a stab at that. I do think that while there are other quality of life issues, we are focused on the minimum housing issues, I believe, is our focus. But I understand and I appreciate the need to address those other quality of life issues, but those are outside of what we're talking about with minimum housing. And that's an important distinction. I'm glad you pointed that out. And our committee has actually, you know, really focused on everything in chapter 18 has been our area of focus. Ian, you're now the host, and there's 2 or 3 of you on the screen here. It's just Ian's night, but do you want to say something?
No, we finally got it. So if anyone wants to speak, and then it needs to speak, if you can raise your hand, or I know Devin and Sebastian are now in here, and I can
Got my hand
change
up too.
people's names to fix
And Christy as well. And I don't know.
Just, Brian, we can stay later, but we have 10 more minutes. I'm just wondering if we want to sort of move the public forum to the end of the agenda and then kind of complete our committee conversations. So we're not just hopping back and forth, just maybe a discussion on next week's agenda and, you know, Zoraya's idea of kind of these buckets with a deeper dive and sort of how to approach it, and then spend the last however much time we need at the end time doing the public forum that we didn't have time for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer that if we pick one issue, you know, to deal with, we're going to get more accomplished than if we pick multiple right now. So I think if we take on, you know, either Just Cause or Housing Board of Review for the next meeting, we can accomplish a lot. And I think if we accomplish a lot on one issue, allows us to then move on to the next. And I think if we take on everything, we actually have interesting discussions, but it's not very conclusive. And it's, yeah.
So fine. I don't care which one. We just make that a decision for the next meeting. And also, I would encourage us to see who else we might want to invite as a panelist. I mean, you know, perhaps legal aid or, you know, somebody that who else works a lot in that. And, you know, what's the issue? How would you change it? What are the options? And, you know, give ourselves some time to go back and forth on that.
Would you be, as committee members, would you be comfortable with having the Housing Board of Review topic be our area of focus for the next meeting? And in the meantime, staff will communicate with the city attorney's office, the Housing Board of Review members, get some information about, you know, what are the caseload and, you know, workload for that committee, and sort of answer some of those questions. We can send questions to Ian and he will hopefully be able to get those answered for us. That would be how I would propose we go.
Yeah,
Or even if the HBR committee could join, that'd be great. I mean, just HBR.
Or a couple members. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can look into that and try and coordinate that.
We meet in 2 weeks from tonight. And at this rate, we're going to be meeting every other week.
Can we, in that vein, I'd love us to set a schedule, because it's easier to cancel a meeting than to get it on your schedule.
Sure.
And so we should just give a shot, and, you know, maybe it's
well,
not.
One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that our list is long for this committee of items. In addition to these items we're talking about, there's other things that have been referred to us by council. When you look at that accountability list, this committee shows up a few times. So we probably are going to need to chip away at this for the next, you know, couple of months, every other week.
And maybe, Brian, if you could work on a schedule and even give a shot at sort of agendas, like next meeting, HRB, and you know, some topics that we could sort of get on the agenda in the next 2-3 months.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that and send it to both of you. That would be probably the best way to do that and get your feedback. That'd be great.
And just to clarify about the code enforcement section of our paperwork, it is about the Chapter 18, minimum housing code requirements.
Yeah.
And the issue is more surrounding enforcing those codes as they are written and not as personally interpreted as they are written. That's our issue with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm trying to stay on top of the. I'm trying to stay on top of the chat items as well. Was there somebody else who was trying to speak there? I'm sorry. I was if I cut you off.
I was going to say that Sebastian Ryder, your hand is still up. I don't know if you were still waiting to speak, or I can lower hand if you're not. Okay. He lowered his hand, so we're all set.
Okay. Yeah. Does that mean if the circle lights up that Sebastian was about to talk? The square?
Oh, apologies, Sebastian. Sorry.
Hollywood squares. Here we go. Sebastian, you're on if you want to share with us.
Great. I guess I just have to really own the fact that I'm incredibly frustrated that while it doesn't seem like code enforcement is taking a back burner, I just feel like it's not being underscored to the level that it should, because it directly speaks to livability in the city of Burlington, which I've lived in the same house in Ward 3 for 18 years now, and the livability quotient goes down every year. I have more and more problems. I have more and more issues. The police come when they're called, less and less. Abandoned vehicles that I was told would get carted away 10 years ago are still there. And I come home many days to garbage on my lawn. My cars are regularly blocked in. I mean, it's, you know, I lose time from work dealing with these issues. To me, it's a very, very serious, frustrating, anxiety-inducing issue regarding how livable Burlington is.
Thank you, and I appreciate your comments and your frustration. Actually, I am dealing with something similar to that right now in this neighborhood where I live in Ward 3. It's not for me, though, as Patty said, there are issues that are impacting of the quality of life, but that are outside of the purview of code enforcement per se. And I just want to be clear that there are a range of behaviors and conduct that take place that have an impact on neighbors that make it a very challenging place to live. And code enforcement, I think, is often viewed as the catch-all where all of that goes, but it's really—
Well, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Because I spent half a day about a week and a half ago on the phone to DCF, and then I called the Vermont Housing Authority, and then I called code enforcement, and I did get props to Patty. I did get some movement from code enforcement, but many of my phone calls were just passing the buck to another agency. So, you know, you tell me what number to call, you tell me where to go, and I will go there. If it's not code enforcement, that, you know, that's fine. But please tell me what recourse I have when people urinate on my lawn, and when their pets urinate on my lawn, and when they throw garbage on my lawn.
I mean, those sound like people breaking laws, I think. So I think that's generally, you know, targeted to the police. Unfortunately,
then tell me how to get the police to show up, because about 50% of the time that I call the police, they're not there. I will relate a story to you about the Burlington police. I lived in New York for about a year, 2 years ago. I was a victim of a crime there. The New York City police were on the phone or coming to my home to help me deal with that crime 7 out of 10 days. I do not get the same results from the Burlington Police Department, and I can't tell you how shocking I find that.
I apologize for that. I think, yeah, there's there are issues there for sure. Sarah, you're trying to speak, so I'm going to ask
Well,
you if you
again,
could.
this is our frustration about being able to do all things all the time. And, you know, looking a little bit at a couple of task groups, and it obviously sounds like we need I'm just going to call it task group on livability. Again, a deeper dive. What are the problems? And then parsing out, okay, what would this committee tackle? What do we effectively package up and ask the Public Safety Commission to deal with? You know, and so maybe taking one of our meetings just on livability, and, you know, what are the issues? Which of them are, quote, police department? Which of them are code enforcement? And which of them are probably human services? And we don't have a committee per se that deals with human service issues, but, you know, maybe there's a community partner there. And this just, because I honestly understand people's frustration, but, you know, sort of trying to put them in some packages and say, public safety, could you spend time on this? We'll spend time on what we're charged with. And then if there's a big gap, you know, you see who else out there we can pull in.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick,
Go ahead, Patty.
so real quick, like, I'm gonna have to leave the meeting, which is unfortunate. But Sebastian, we don't usually talk to specific people, but I can tell you that the issue that Sebastian has brought up has not fallen on deaf ears. And I think I was only made aware of it last week, and we've been following it, and we've been working with the property owner, which is challenging at best in some cases, but only a handful of cases. And we code enforcement, for instance, are not the be all end all for all things enforcement. And we spend a lot of time coaching people on how to get the other issues addressed. When you're talking about the Burlington Police Department, if, for instance, it's not an emergency, like somebody is dying, or the house is on fire type of situation, we suggest that as you observe things, that you file the complaint online, because it has to be, issues are given like report numbers when they come in through the online portal, which creates a paper trail. And I'm not saying this to create more work or issues for the police department, but it would maybe escalate the seriousness of the situation. I don't know who has been called. When people call us to look into things, I don't know who else has been called or how many times, unless there's a record in our database of a complaint being lodged. And we follow those complaints to some kind of conclusion. It may not be what everyone agrees is the satisfactory conclusion, but we do follow it. So, all of the things that are being discussed here are things that I think are obviously ripe for conversation. It's just, and I do understand how frustrating it is to live next door to a place that's problematic, but code enforcement is limited by what's in our code, minimum housing code, and as the town health officers to enforce. We can guide you to the appropriate or a more appropriate enforcement agency, and they can address it. I'm not sure how else to tease that out. Sebastian, I'm happy to speak with you offline again, and partner with you to continue to pressure property owner to keep doing what they're doing.
Let me offer just this, Sebastian, since I am your city councilor, and I'd like to be able to work with you on this. Let's talk offline. I'll give you my my direct number is 578-6953, and I feel your pain. I hear your pain. I feel your pain. I want to make sure we find a way to at least get the appropriate response to you. And all I can promise is I'll at least try, and I'll work with you on that. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Other comments to wrap up here? We were going to go till, I think, 7:30. We've gone a little bit past that. We have our work cut out for us. I'm glad the other committee members are ready to dig in, and we have great staff. So I'm up, and we have some wonderful partners who joined us tonight who offered to help. So this I think we have the ingredients to get some things accomplished, and let's commit to being accountable to the people who've asked us to take these issues on. So anything else for closing it up?
Also, just a huge thank you to staff. I know that they're in tough spots and trying to do a lot and make a lot of residents happy. So yeah, thank you for all of your time, both in these meetings and spend with residents, and then also in your day job.
Thank you.
We will be meeting again in 2 weeks, and I'll send out a proposed schedule with sort of a skeleton idea of the topics at the upcoming meetings.
Yeah.
Excellent. And like I
guys.
said, I'd be willing to work with anybody on any one of these specific topics as you're talking about this stuff. We didn't, like I
Appreciate
said
that. Thanks,
before, we don't
Christy.
expect an immediate, but yeah.
Christy, I
Yeah.
don't think I have it. Before we leave, could you maybe, I don't know if you feel comfortable, send your email across or some way to reach you on the chat?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, I think we're all done. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night. Try and enjoy a little bit of sun while it's still shining.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.